Good afternoon. Welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on traditional ancestral territory of Coast Salish peoples. My name is Nan Capogna. I'm the curator for the gallery. I would like to acknowledge and thank my co-curator, Connie Watts, who worked with me on this exhibition, Interweavings. I'd like to also thank Kathy Tykolis, who arranged for this afternoon. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce the Richmond Art Gallery Association Board President, Mark Lindy, who will say a few words.
And Chief Audio Technician. Welcome, and thank you for coming to participate this afternoon. The Richmond Art Gallery Association is the auxiliary society that supports the good work of this gallery through fundraising and membership. Membership is not expensive. Currently it's $20, and what it means to us is when we apply for grants, they like to know how many members and people directly support us. So I urge you to spread the word and encourage people to join as members. And please enjoy this afternoon, and again, thank you.
I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for today's discussion, Brenda Crabtree. Brenda is the Aboriginal Program Manager of the Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver. She has an MA from the University of Washington, Western Washington. She's a member of the Spuzum Band and has both Blackabunk and Strumlo ancestry. Her practice includes cedar and spruce root basketry, drum making, moose hair tufting, and beadwork. I appreciate so much that you are moderating this today, Brenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll do the best I can. Here we go. There's not many Spuzum Indians in the Lower Mainland, so I'm quite a rare sighting. So there you go. I would really like to acknowledge the work of the YVR Art Foundation that was founded in 1993 that really made this type of mentorship possible. And I'm going to ask Susan Jackson, the Executive Director, to please give us just a brief overview.
Thanks, Brenda. Just very briefly, the YVR Art Foundation was founded in 1993 by the Vancouver Airport Authority. And in 2005, we started the Youth Scholarship Program, and the 7 artists that are in this exhibition are all past recipients of the Youth Scholarship from the YVR Art Foundation. Last year, we also introduced 2 new programs, the Mid-Career Artist Scholarship and also the Masterpiece Study Program, which provides travel grants to artists throughout BC to travel to Vancouver and Victoria to visit museums like the Museum of Anthropology or the Royal BC Museum and to study their collections of BC First Nations art. So just so happens that our call for applications for scholarships has just gone out, so I want to let everyone know if you know anyone or if you are interested in applying, please do visit our website and download the applications. So I just wanted to actually thank again Richmond Art Gallery for your partnership on this exhibition and also for presenting this panel discussion today. Thank you.
We're going to begin with a brief introduction, approximately 5 minutes per artist, just so that you can learn a little bit about who they are and where they're from before we get into some of the more established questions. And we're going to begin with you, London.
Oh, you'd like me to speak on that?
I would. Why don't you speak on yourself? Speak on yourself.
I am Scottish, and I'm also Namgis. From my mother's side, northern Vancouver Island, and I'm Coast Salish and Pug youth. I grew up in Squamish. My father carried his hereditary. He's gone now. He's left us, but he carried the hereditary name of Seymour Creek, by what we now call Iron Workers Memorial Bridge here in Vancouver. And my mother is also partly from Capilano, the village of Hamaltitson, and also her family up in Alert Bay. So I have a nice stretch of land that I could work with in the arts. So I started working off with the Northern style art, and I remember doing more of that stuff in my earlier age, and the late Mary Harris helped me out with that. And it was a bit scary for a guy coming from Squamish, but you know, eventually you overcame that. You know, you get your money in your pocket for rent, and you're walking down the city of Vancouver, and you're thinking, oh my God, I got $800 in my pocket. That was a lot of money back then, right? Paid my rent and food for the month and transportation. So I moved into what we now call Emily Carr College of Art. And, you know, we met 4 other artists. Lyle Wilson was one of the artists there. No, don't talk about him. And I had many other guys that, I have another colleague that was there also, that was in the show, who Cody mentioned. And eventually after I finished that, I moved into trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and someone's invited me to a conference, and they invited me to start working in the schools, and I worked in the schools for 25 years. So I did a lot of native artwork in the schools and shared that from kindergarten to grade 12. And I was hit some lucky times when Expo 86 came around. I did artwork for Expo 86. It wasn't my artwork, but I worked with Simon Dick, and I also worked with George Ramo, and we did stuff for Spirit Lodge. And then moving on through the Olympics, I did a lot of artwork for the bid book and also for the Olympics itself, 2010. And I carry on just doing artwork. I enjoy doing artwork, and that's all I do. I have my son who's involved me here, but he's not here. He's on a nice holiday somewhere. But I'm happy to be here, take part, and it's been a good time here. Thank you, and thank you to YVR for helping these young folks out. And because my son's piece is here, he showed there, so we'll see him. Thank you.
I would also like to acknowledge that James has just graduated with his Bachelor of Fine Arts from Emily Carr, and Paul Acton's son Austin is in his final year at Emily Carr. So truly education is at the heart of this family. And I also have to acknowledge that I don't know another individual who's mentored more people than Paul Acton. And just truly a giving spirit, and anytime that we have anything cultural happening at Emily Carr, he's always the first one to show up with his drum. In fact, he carved our chancellor's staff. He drums and sings the graduates in every year at our graduation ceremony. So just his heart and spirit is just greatly appreciated at Emily Carr, and he continues to influence our students greatly. The next person that we're going to ask to introduce himself is Cody, and I wanted to acknowledge that Cody is the recipient of 2 scholarships in 2011 and 2012. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Cody McCoy. I'm from Penticton, Silks of the Okanagan Nation, and my dad's from Esquimalt on the coast. I've been living here for the past 5 years, studying art at Quality University, pursuing a bachelor's degree, and I've been living, working, and creating here, and I'd like to speak a bit to tradition, and I'd say how it has been playing into my art practice as of lately. I'd say it started, first of all, from school, picking up the paintbrush and realizing that was my first passion, and then developing that through the YVR Art Scholarship Program with Florence Paul. And I'd say really stepping into that area of work and practice was expanding on terms of painting on campus as a tradition, and also diving into my own cultural roots as an enhancement to the life practice and where I like to stand in my work approach. And being here for 5 years away from Penticton, where I was raised, I feel there's a bridge in my art, and the art acts as a bridge to tie those cultural roots to my current situation as urban indigenous, and I really carry the landscape and the knowledge and the cultural practices of Penticton sort of with me through my art, and I'd say that's sort of been the main focus of bridging those two realities together and sort of coming together to develop a more sort of holistic or integrated experience of living, and that's really where the art and culture influence that as a way of being and kind of tying back into that practice where the art wasn't even really considered an art, but more a celebration of the spirit of the people and the landscape and all those ways of life that originate through that. So bridging those two ways of life has been the main driving force of what painting has sort of come to serve within my life and given the purpose and meaning through, I guess, the art I create. That's about it.
Thank you, Cody. And the next person who will introduce himself is Bill McLennan, and he certainly really needs no introduction, probably. I knew about Bill's reputation as an educator, as his expertise in Pacific Northwest Coast art, long before I ever met the man. And he continues to be somewhat of a legend. And although he's retired recently, I think he's busier than ever. And he is also part of the YVR Art Foundation board, and he's just valued throughout the province. And I know that I think you sit on almost every art adjudication committee that there is, because I just don't think there's anyone that has the knowledge and expertise that Bill does, and it's just truly appreciated within the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal community. And your CV's way too long for me to read, Bill, so I'm going to let you highlight the parts that you would like to.
Thanks. Well, it's been a privilege to work with Northwest Coast Art and the artists, rebuilding the history. When you think about Northwest Coast art and First Nations art, you think about societies of an oral tradition that when they produced the work, they were putting more knowledge into those works than just something that people would see in passing. So they had the knowledge, it was there. Those artifacts have been traveling around the world for a couple hundred years. They move out there, and fortunately some of those pieces are coming back, and with them they bring the knowledge and they bring the craftsmanship that was with those pieces. It still is. And so that's my feeling about mentorship, is looking at old works in collections. And so one of the processes was developing using infrared and other techniques to bring pieces together that are spread around the world and making them accessible. And that came out in a book, thanks to Karen and Lyle, Transforming Image, which has been out for 14 years. You do a book like that, people have different opinions. I still think that it's quite valid, and I wouldn't change my mind and move it all to one culture against another culture, which some people think I should go into that. But anyways, so that kind of work. More recently, I developed the technique of scanning, and so recognizing the bracelet work that was done in the early times, which was never more or less outlawed by potlatch. So it's something that had its own life. It survived, it kept being produced and that. But again, they're in many private collections, some of the most valuable ones, and then they're spread around. So the idea of being able to scan those, bring them together, and share them with one young artist. And so a lot of that sharing is, say, at the Frida DC School up in Terrace. So there's a great project. The sad thing, there's only one of those schools in British Columbia. There should be umpteen dozen spread around the whole British Columbia. But First Nations young people from more or less all over the province now go there. They train, they work with each other, they get support, and they use some of the photographs and the enlargements that we've produced in Transforming Image as mentors, these physical things where they can run their hand over these drawings and step back 100 years or 200 years and get the sense of that artist and their animation and how they're producing work. So those sorts of things are the things that excite me. Bringing knowledge back, because that knowledge is coming back. Some of the other projects where with Expo 86, which was mentioned, I was the registrar, so it was the biggest buying budget I ever had in my life. So going to Pakistan and buying buses and trucks or all the things that were on the different plazas. And then with the Canadian Museum of Civilization, initially that whole construction project was going to go to a design firm in Montreal to be built. And at the time, George MacDonald and Andrea Laforette asked Mike Ames, the director of MoA at the time, if we would take it on. So we did, and then all those contracts went to First Nations communities, community members to build all those houses. So some of those houses hadn't been built in probably almost 150 years. So that was an exciting project, and again, the knowledge of production comes back to people. I remember Dominic Point at Musqueam when they were building the Coast Salish house, and one of the plans split, and right away he remembered what was glue, what was Coast Salish glue from the Fraser River, what were the plants you needed, where did you find it, and all the young artists were sort of saying like, why didn't you ever tell us this before? And so the whole mechanism of doing things brings knowledge back and reinvigorates it. Same with the Xinjiang crew. Elders were coming down to see what they were doing. You'd see how nervous they were. They were almost petrified of these elders coming down to talk about their work in that. So the elders looked at the work and then they said, it's fine what you're doing. And so this one elder took the elbow adze and did this beautiful herringbone technique and said, if it was a high-rank house, that's how it would be. You're doing a commoner's house and that's fine. And so the reconstruction and the rethinking of knowledge is a very exciting process and a very invigorating process. And that's what I've been lucky enough to be involved with.
Thank you, Bill. And next, but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Connie Watts. I first met Connie, I guess 15 years ago when I first started as the Aboriginal Program Manager at Emily Carr. And Connie was actually on our board of directors. We're really proud of the fact that Emily Carr has always had an Aboriginal representation on the board. And she showed up larger than life and always has a big smile on her face. And I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Thank you for all coming out and spending time, even if it's sunny outside, which we rarely get in the winter time, so thank you for coming in. I am Tishat from the Nuchanoth Nation, Gitsan, so up north, and then Quaguth from Alert Bay, the mountains from that area, and the Sterretts and Morgans from up north. I grew up in Campbell River though, so I was very surrounded by the Kwakwaka'wakw design style more so, and now that I've moved back to Port Alberni, I actually start to work closer to the Nuchanoth style. But the reality is that I tend to use the art form to tell a story or to show a personality, because everything that we created was alive, and that is the philosophy that I create everything with. And so the beauty of being a co-curator for the show and seeing these established, amazing artists working with these young and mentoring these younger artists was to see that knowledge being passed on and how it's being passed on and the access of it. And I know that the Richmond Art Gallery has been rushing with the show, and so the catalog is now just going to print. But there is an essay based on the ideas of learning. How do we learn? And how do we teach others? And being Northwest Coast, a lot that I was taught was by seeing it. I always remember the story of my grandmother, and I told my mom I wanted to go let her teach me how to knit. Mom said, yeah, I don't know, she'll just yell at you. And I said, that's okay, I can manage that. And she literally cast on and started knitting, and that's how I learned how to knit. And that is often how we're shown things. You learn and feel it and see it, and then you experience it and do it. And I think throughout all of the artists, younger artists in here, whether it was going back through school and being more urban oriented, or growing up in their own culture, surrounded by Indigenous knowledge, and then carrying on those more historical craftsmanship when they're creating, whether it's carving or weaving or whatever the means is. And then there's another group that may have grown up in that, surrounded by Indigenous knowledge, and yet takes it. And I always have this saying that to be traditional, Northwest Coast means you're innovative. You use the materials around you. You're strongly creative, and you're creating life every day. And so when people are traditional, I look at the work in this show, and I'm looking at Cody's work that's new experimental, James's work that's new and experimental, but that's traditional. That's the way we were as a culture. We always used everything to the best that we could, the least amount of waste, and made it come to life. And I think that that's what I was able to start to gain a deeper understanding in the show with. And I'm sure it'll translate back to my work again. But in my work, the slides that are showing up behind you, there is a sculpture that I did for the residential school survivors in Port Alberni, and it's actually 3 Thunderbirds going through. But I had to research to see what it was. The sculpture itself stands to talk about residential schools, so it's a portion. But the reality is, as a society, we are healing and we are healthy, and we're all of those things at the same time. And with that sculpture, that's what that showed. And then there's one of my very first public sculptures, and I thought it was fitting since it's at the airport, is the big Thunderbird. And again, they said, oh, well, we want something more contemporary. And I said, yeah, but I'm not contemporary, I'm traditional. I may use different materials, I may use all of this thing in innovative ways, but that is us, that's our culture, and that's the way we are. So that piece is a traditional piece. And then I think the other one was the interior. I did a large, I'm an interior designer also, so artist and interior designer. We did the large building for the Songhees Wellness Center in Victoria, so on Admirals and Mill Bay Road. And it's a 48,000 square multi-purpose space. And so I did all their interiors, their wayfinding, and a graphic package. And we actually produced a book called Songhees out of that. And when I was working for the Olympics, we produced, I keep publishing these books, and the way I do it is I say, I think we should do a book, and they say, how are you going to do it? I say, I don't know. And then everything starts to fall into place, but we did a book called OSIM to honor the work that was held throughout the Olympics, and Paul Acton's work was throughout there because he did all of the, he created a base graphic that was used in all of the licensed products. So you got to see the Coast Salish, Northwest Coast work out into the world and in a venue that it may not have ever been in. So anyway, I'm very happy to have had the privilege of working with Nan and co-curating this show and meeting all these incredible artists. As long as I'm not pronouncing names, I do well. But thank you very much for coming out. Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll talk a little bit. We do have a set of questions that we're going to be putting forth to the artists up here, but we also want the audience to be engaged. So we really welcome you to ask questions during the presentations. Otherwise, it seems too prescribed if you have to wait till after or remember them. So please feel free. It's very informal and it's a small group, so I think that would be the best way to proceed. So the first topic that we're going to ask the artists to discuss is the idea of mentorship. And of course, that's really the heart and the foundation of what the YVR scholarships are all about. And that differs very much so from formal education. So, for example, at Emily Carr, we have approximately 80 Aboriginal students there, and it's prescribed. It's a linear European model of education. So they select the courses. There's a number of courses that they have to graduate. They are, it's dictated and prescribed who the instructor is. So they actually don't get to choose who is going to teach them sculpture, who is going to teach them to paint. They can try and pick and choose, but the wonderful thing about the YVR Art Foundation scholarships is that they actually choose the mentor that they would like to work with. So I think we'd start with you, Cody, and with the question of mentorship, what does it mean to you? How does it work? How does it differ from formal education for you?
We'd like to sort of springboard off of what Bill said earlier about doing, and really having that practice developed by getting into it and experiencing it for yourself. And through mentorship with Lawrence Paul Yuxelton, that was the main thing I took back, was that there was so much I learned just by seeing and being in the presence of his work that it fuels me to want to create, and it also goes beyond the work of art itself. It goes into that relationship of him as a human being and what he's expressing and how he expresses that with sort of with the integrity and the honesty that you can, and you can't really get that any other way but by being in the space of how that art comes to be created. And I really feel there's a strong connection with mentorship in sort of pushing the culture through. And that goes back to doing again. And for tradition, I really resonate strongly with those practices that are done upon the land of their origin, because it really goes to shape how you see the land and how you interact with it, and how it really becomes a life force that is invigorated and reinvigorated, and it has a stronger vitality through the art being produced, and it's sort of an endless cycle that comes from the land and from the art that's created in it, and through mentorship, and to see the hard work and the dedication, discipline, and courage behind Lawrence's messages, that it's boundless inspiration that you can draw upon and wish to live for yourself, and that tie between mentorship and learning just goes hand in hand, and also that learning and culture is hand in hand with the land, and I feel that's very strong force for the people living here, and to kind of shape how we move forward together on this land, together.
Thank you, Cody. I'm going to ask Palatine to speak to the concept of mentorship now.
Well, I could start off by, the mentorship actually starts with ourselves, because a lot of it was trial and error for myself. Because I didn't have someone there teaching me how to approach, say for instance, wood carving or storytelling, although it may have been around me, but like sometimes as young people we go deaf ear, but we pick up some things. So I was in a time where we're kind of moving towards that now. When I was going into art school, I didn't have really anyone to look at. I enjoyed being there, and I was able to experiment from that. But as I got through and I started looking at more native art, I started seeing other artwork. So I was seeing native artwork from an indirect way. Like when I started to move into Coast Salish design, I saw Charles Elliott's work when I followed a run called A Sacred Run Across Canada. So I really focus on not just myself, but community and what's our background, is who we are. And also I think it comes through us. Like for me, I believe the ancestors are also coming through us. And if we just allow ourselves to to be open to that, then we just have things happen at times, and I just start artwork, and I just, wow, where did that come from? You know, I'm just kind of feeding off that from what might be greater, what is greater than myself. I enjoy mentoring others, and I just let them be who they are and just be able to experiment and be themselves. I'll give them some technical direction, but I also leave them. And it's pretty awesome to see what they come up with. Like, I just got back yesterday. I was up north in northern Alberta in a community there, and they have in front of their band building, they call it their Thunderbird Stone or Thunderbird Egg, and they want to do something around that for healing in their community. And I just, you know, just help them think for themselves, what can we come up with? And then we would go over, some of the elders will share some stories and what kind of imageries that can we bring up so that the people after them, say generations after that, what can they pick up from this work? So we're looking at traditional work, but we're also looking at contemporary work. But really, it's about who they are and where they're coming from. And it's all about the land also. Because there's some destruction happening around their community, but they're trying to come back together and refocus who they are. So I think mentoring is important. You know, like even in the past, they may have grabbed someone and say, hey, this person's got a gift, and they're just going to feed on that gift and help that young person become greater in themselves. Yeah, a lot of my mentoring was indirect because I saw some artists. I know a lot of artists too, and I love their work. And you know, I pick up from them also just by seeing what they're doing, right? And we learn off from one another. We hear stories, and the stories are quite similar. And not even just here in Native culture, but in all cultures, I look at where their stories are also coming from. So it helps us to move forward in the art world, because artwork, we didn't have a word for art. It was more, it was a way of life to help pass on messages and to move. And what can we leave behind for the others?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I would actually like to ask Bill about his role in mentorship with Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal individuals who have either voluntarily or involuntarily been disconnected from their communities, and go to someone like you, Bill, because of your area of expertise, because of your knowledge of art styles. Could you talk a little bit about your role in the mentorship of Aboriginal artists?
That's a bit of a hard one, actually, but lots of community members. So actually, let me just, I was thinking about something, let me just step back in context. So yesterday I had to give a little spiel, and what it was is that about 50 years ago, Bill Reed sent a letter to a woman in Victoria who started the first gift shop there, Bessie Fitzgerald. And in the letter it says, I finished this silver box, I tried oxidizing, and still took too long. So I'm charging you $245 for that box. And maybe we'll split the actual markup just for the prestige of having done that piece. So that box now is insured for $40,000. So what it does is it gives you that time frame of 50 years of people fighting and bringing back an art form, but also the broader society who supports it, and communities that are supporting it now as well. So for a long time, you know, the art simply was, you know, under the potlatch, under the residential school. You know, the smallpox that took place in the late 1800s that wiped out some populations up to 90%. You lose a lot of information. You lose a lot of momentum in that. So it's taken the vitality of artists to bring that back and make it powerful again, which is Obviously, you can see it around you, but you see it everywhere, just the power of the art that's come back. And so lots of times, yeah, I've met with lots of young artists who are trying to track down their history, find it and reconnect. Sometimes disconnected from their own community, in that some communities really haven't re-embraced, they, I guess in a pompous way, I say they have been brainwashed anyway. And it takes a while for a community to realize their history was one of the most brilliant histories, and it is one of the most brilliant histories in the world. And so it needs to be kept intact. And that a lot of the misinformation that was put out there, by the church, by the government, by the industry, is not correct. And so people are coming back together and putting it back together. And that's exciting.
Thank you. And Connie, we'd like you to speak on the concept of mentorship and what it means to you.
Well, in my introduction, I did go through the styles, but I think my grandmother was a great teacher, and I think that that ability to expect you to feel it and know it and see it, I think that mentorship is important in terms of bringing life in teaching, and that closeness that you feel with the person you're working with, and you literally feel them. And First Nations is to feel to learn. You can't see it and read it. You actually have to feel it to know it. And I think that's why when Palakton was talking about connecting to our ancestors, I fully believe that. I actually was in a car accident and fractured my brain in 2 places. I said if I wasn't connected to my ancestors, I wouldn't have been able to create what I created, because it came from somewhere. And it definitely was not my brain function that was working at the time, but I could create. And I think that, and it's also my mother saying, you have a gift and you have to use it. And if you don't use it, it's taken from you, which it was with this car accident. So I think the idea of teaching and mentoring and being that part is that connection. And being First Nations, we are all one. And that doesn't mean we're of the land where it's just this land. It is literally the universe that we're connected to, and we know and we see and we feel. And as Indigenous cultures, we used to know that inside of ourselves, and we lived it. And there was a story once of up in Hideaway area where some of the fishermen got lost. Well, the elder women told them where to go rescue them. They felt where they were at. And they said, oh no, they couldn't have. So they logically were looking for days, and finally someone said, let's go see if they were right. They found them because they could see them and they were connected to them. And I think when we're looking at mentoring and teaching, it's literally not just teaching, it's showing how to feel openly and share knowledge. And I think that's the strength in mentoring in any way, shape, or form. I think school has its merits, it makes us research, it makes us, I mean, when I met Bill, it was incredible, his access to so much knowledge and so much, for lack of a better word, objects that could tell a story that I wouldn't have known before. I also, because I went with this head injury and I ended up doing art and I was just looking at other people's art and books and everywhere else, I didn't realize the unique styles in all of the different areas until I talked to Bill. I'm like, oh, that's New Charnock, oh, that's, and he was able to describe the finite of what made it from these different territories, from these different areas. And I think just as important to keep our language intact, it's also important to have those design styles fortified and strengthened, because they do represent a whole culture from those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. I'm going to ask if there's any questions now from the audience. Otherwise, we'll carry on. Okay, I'd like to speak now to the question of traditional versus contemporary. Often, if artists are labeled traditional, they're criticized for living in the past. If they're labeled as being contemporary, sometimes they're criticized for having lost their culture, having lost their tradition. And that is certainly, those are certainly labels and interpretations that have been imposed upon Aboriginal artists, and I would like you to speak to that.
I could say those two are connected actually as one to me, because if we were to stick to, for me, myself, this is what I'm feeling, is that if we stick to tradition, we'd still be doing rock paintings, right? And we wouldn't grow from that. And I think that, I think for me, it's just, like, it's a living art. It's what's happening now, or what kind of message do we want to pass on with that? Because I know at one time I used to just do artwork and not have any messages with it. But now when I do something, there's always some kind of form of message to go with that piece. So I feel that those two are actually connected. And like for myself, I don't judge someone else's artwork and say, hey, that's not traditional. You know, it's, for me, I feel like I don't have the right to say that to that person. Well, it could be because, you know, like there was more artwork in one area than the other. But that's the way I see it for myself.
People, you know, first off, you know, artists say working in Boa, carving a pole, people say, no, you're not traditional, look, you're using a metal light. Well, you know, in the Ozette site on the Olympic Peninsula, there's Japanese steel that's 600 years old. So the fact is that if you had access to Japanese steel to carve something 600 years ago, then that's what you used. If you were still using a muscle shell sharpen, then that's what you were using. Art is always in the context of the time frame, and the time frames in the past were changing slower, and they're changing faster now. So I don't see any time there wasn't something traditional, and everything today is traditional. So I think it's simply an argument. It's like how many fairies can sit on that pinhead.
Thank you. Cody?
Thanks. I would try my best not to label art. I think it's open to provide more questions than any definite labels or restrictions in that sense. And I was going to talk about tradition and actually, one second, I lost my train of thought. But I think for the artists, you can really step into a long lineage and power with the ancestors that the knowledge is there in a tradition. And I think where it gets confusing is when you start to base it on a linear sort of train of thought. An artist can choose to take as much as they feel to gain from tradition, and for artists that's their own choice to see how much it influences them, and you can, like, when you step into that, it broadens your art practice to yourself, and it bridges you to others that are, you know, keeping that art alive, and it's really up to the artist to take as much as they want to gain from it, because tradition holds very strong benefits to artists or anyone in general to have that bond that connects to you, and it just kind of reinvigorates your own art practice and keeps it alive and well.
Connie?
So I think contemporary and traditional, is that the categories? I think they're limiting. I think that often we do things culturally I made button blankets once, and I said, I'm making these blankets, do I need to come and check with you? Because, of course, I'm tied to the Pogyouth area too, and our use of the different animals is much different up there as opposed to the Nuchoneth. Then the Gitsan, they've got a whole another set of rules. And I had one of the elders say, if you're not dancing it in the big house and you're using it for events, do whatever you want, because it's an art piece, right? It's something that you wear. So I think that we have to start to reframe it, that there are people that are using our work similarly how we used to use it historically, for potlatching, for gifting, for all of these things that we do culturally. And I think that is a stronger way of looking at it. And then you have other artwork that is literally used for hanging on walls or filling space or telling a story. So I think it's those categorizations that work for me stronger. When I know there's a mask that's going to be danced, it's handled much differently than a mask that's going to be hung on the wall. I had a friend of mine that was non-native do a drawing, Lawrence Lowe, drawing on a drum, and I had a friend said, "So are you going to go dance it in the big house?" I said, "No, that's for my wall." And she goes, "Well, you can't make a drum without singing on it, like using it." And I thought that is culturally the way that we do things. We use it. It's supposed to be alive and used. But because the separation with how artwork is handled, I mean, a lot of the artwork in galleries, you don't touch the artwork, where when we have artwork, it is alive and we use it every day. So I think those would be stronger divides in terms of how we look at our work and categories of our work. You know, is it used culturally, or is it used as literal artwork that we view today as a separate entity in itself?
Thank you. Any questions? Very quiet group. Okay, well, we'll get a little more politically hot with our topics now. I would like to discuss the topic of appropriation. Appropriation with regards to the unique communities that we come from, the commercialization of our artwork. We all have to pay our phone bills and our heat bills, and so economically we'd like to be viable as artists. But there are also issues of appropriation of styles from one community to the other. And it's a very complex topic, but I would like you to speak to it a lot in terms of your art practice.
I'm Squamish. If we go back another 1 or 2 generations, we had our elders. Our elders were carving, and the carving style was the Quaggia style. And how that happened was we had Ellen Neal come in, and she was teaching some of our people how to carve. So, and when you look in our Squamish Nation area, we have a lot of Quaggia style artwork. And but also probably because also there was intermarriages happening at that time. So it was my mother is her mother is Christine Cook. So we were tied that way. I'm tied with the Quaggia up that way. So we see, I grew up with a lot of doing artwork from that style, right? So I was okay to be able to do that, but there was also other Squamish people that didn't have any ties with the Quaggia, but were doing the same style, right? So some of them are just pure Squamish, and they're doing Quaggia designs. So I think just getting more back into like the Salish design is just that I felt like I had to push more Salish style after I learned more about it by seeing, you know, Charles Elliott's work, and then I started looking it up and looking at it in books and reading about it. When I see stuff in the stores that are made from abroad, like, I mean, when I was younger, when you saw, you know, the stuff that was made overseas, and then finding out that that wasn't traditional artwork. But although I saw those things moving quicker than the things that I was making, it's wow. But you know, for me, I just persevered and just kept doing what I had to do and just keep doing the work myself the best I can.
Thank you. That's great. And Bill, I'm going to ask you to speak to the same issue of appropriation, because I know I've sat on many adjudication committees with Bill, and I always find it interesting when a slide will come up of an artist's work, and it might be a Quaggia artist, but you will notice that they've got a different element in it, a height, a form, line, and design in it, and we don't always know the whole history. You're right, we don't know who they're married to, who their family is. And I wonder if you can speak to that issue, because you just had so much experience with that.
Well, those adjudication committees are supposed to be private. I suppose I'm talking about.
They are private.
So in a way, it's not my business to get mad about things. I do get mad about it. But yesterday I think it was a great event. Alvin Mack, who's Newhall, won the Lifetime Achievement Award for his efforts in bringing Newhall work back to the Bella Valley teaching. And I remember the first time I met Alvin, he was the only person in the whole valley producing Newhall work. And if you were an art dealer and you wanted Newhall work, you bought white artists in Seattle that turned it out like crazy. And I think it's totally inappropriate. I just, you know, and it's done, you know, laws have changed now. So if you buy one of those masks now, it has to say inspired by the Newhall people, as opposed to a Newhall mask, because it's not. And so the dynamics of seeing communities re-engaging with their own history and rebuilding their own history takes away any of the circumstance and excuses that were made in producing that work. But also I'd say, you know, when we did the infrared and looked at it, there was one artist where we found, you know, one of his works in Masset, one of his works in Hazelton, some of his works in the Mid-Skeena, some down at the Hiltzik. And so he was an artist that was, you know, in a time maybe in the 1840s, was recognized by different communities and different people who were happy to head his work because of the dynamics of it and the exception of it. So in the past, artists were recognized, but also their art was brought by their communities. And as with artists today, it would inspire other people. So, you know, when is it copied or when is it, you know, simply an inspiration? I mean, those arguments will continue for generations as they reflect back on their pieces. But there is a dynamic there, and it is the rights of the community to be able to either work with those pieces and keep them in the community or market them as they might feel appropriate. So it's a difficult question, difficult issue.
Cody, can you speak to appropriation?
Yeah, the sort of area of concern that I feel drawn towards in appropriation, sort of, I guess it would stem from sort of our hesitancy towards, sorry, not that, but I guess with appropriation of images reproduced over and over, and when it's talked about in that consumerism level, as Blackton mentioned, I think that still will be most felt with the artist making the work, and it's really, as an artist, this work you put into something, there's always a return, and you're evident of what you're putting into the work and what you expect to sort of see happen with it. So it's fair enough that they're artists making work to make a living, and if that's what they choose to do, then it's their choice, and the artist will feel what is given back to them from what they produce. If there's a money driving the work, then that will be felt. But in terms where appropriation gets handled, I see is when it's not connected to where it's from, and as artists to really foster that well-being of taking the onus of holding that culture in their hands and being in full control of where they want to push it, then that's the direction that I'd like to see it sort of grow, and when someone's involved in making a message, and if it's beyond themselves and for a community, then they will feel what they get back from that. So it's felt to kind of see the return that you have in the art, and it always kind of shapes your practice or direction.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm trying to frame how I would say it angers me, non-First Nations making our work in general. I mean, I go up and down the coast, but there's people that are related to different nations across Canada. But I was glad when the states came out with, I think it's a $250,000 fine if they don't disclose that it's not Aboriginal work. And I thought, at least that's a start. It doesn't mean much yet, but at least it's a start. And I think it's because, for me, it's sacred. It's us. It's from our culture. And those that are non-native that are doing it are craftspeople. I mean, if you're an artist, you come from where you're coming from. And for me, it's not artwork. If it's not from you and it's not from your nation and not from your culture. But on the other hand, people that are inspired by us, like Emily Carr, love her work because she's taken something that she's been surrounded by her whole life and shared it. And I think that's respectful. And I think that our ability to first of all, we were so ignored before, and now that the artwork is now making money, all of a sudden it's, oh, it's a money-making thing, so now we're going to do it too. But it's not a doing it thing. I don't think anyone up in this panel or anyone in the show does it because we're just producing stuff to sell. We actually do it because it's meaningful and it's connected to us. And I think that it belittles and disrespects our culture when it's done by non-native people. Now, I get the finite part of it, but often our knowledge base, I mean, when I was going through school, I didn't grow up on reserve, and I had the 2 weeks of, learning about the Indians in grade 4. That was all I got. And now I grew up and I was in my family, and I was surrounded by my family, but there was no real knowledge of us. And now through this artwork and through this art form, people are starting to understand us more. And I think when you start to deal with outside people reproducing it, because I think it's a cool thing that they can make money with, that it belittles that sharing of knowledge. And I think that sharing of knowledge is something that's the most important thing to human beings in general, no matter where you're from. Because we're all Indigenous from somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Still no questions after that?
Very good.
I'd just like to insert a comment, and Connie, you started to address it. In terms of education, elementary school and secondary education, it does not seem that it is a large part of the curriculum. I know that there are certain years where it is emphasized, but I would like to see it more integrated in the different aspects of learning.
I absolutely agree. I think it is happening. I think there is a lot more happening in the K-12 arena. Certainly, I can speak to the post-secondary. We are working very hard throughout BC as post-secondary institutes, colleges, universities, and whatnot to indigenize the academy. And by indigenizing the academy, we mean infusing Aboriginal knowledge into all areas of the curriculum. So whether it's a science class, a math class, it's an easy one to apply it to art classes, but we really are intent on indigenizing the curriculum throughout the university, everything from an undergraduate degree to a PhD. And that is happening now. And you had a question? I think you had that.
I wasn't familiar with the artworks of the Native Canadians, but I just noticed that your artwork is more drawn or more connected to depicting animal stories or animals as opposed to trees or rivers or mountains. Is that the distinctive characteristics of the Native?
Bill, I would like to speak to the depiction. I'm going to get into trouble for
Well, the broad history of First Nations across Canada, in the Northwest Coast particularly, is that people at a certain point came from the creatures of the earth. So some people took off their coats, they took off their feathers, and they became the human of the ravens or the eagles or they left them on and they stayed happily where they were. So that's why that reference is there. And then those sort of interventions with other creatures became their crests. So as their oral histories, which are thousands of years old, move from different areas of the north coming south, the memories of meeting different creatures are brought into their crest system. So it's not just, say, grizzly, but I said grizzly with all these other crests associated with it. So it's the experiences of the families in their movement into new areas that brought those crests together, as opposed to a tree. Although there are some crests, so the fireweed is a crest, and a beautiful crest. So.
But I just noticed that you're very connected to nature anyways, with the trees and grass and plants and all that stuff. So.
Yes, thank you. And you had a question?
I was actually just going to respond to the previous question about First Nations curriculum being integrated. And so most recently in the BC Social Studies curriculum, the First Nations component is being integrated to every grade level from kindergarten up to grade 12. But my only concern with that is that, it's going to be a real challenge for teachers to actually be teaching that because they're teaching from a perspective that's not from their own culture. And to me, that's a really big concern. One of the ways I think we can bridge that is for teachers in schools doing field trips to First Nations cultural centers and being taught that way. But it is coming, but I think that we do have some concerns on how it's going to be implemented.
And I think the Aboriginal community would at the very least expect that part of the curriculum would be developed by Aboriginal educators. So it would quite easily, it could quite easily come to the schools as a package. So in other words, it could include DVDs and modules that have been, in fact, researched, designed, and written by Aboriginal people, and that would combat that issue a little bit. Connie.
There's also, I know in Port Alberta we have our own elementary school. I know Dididuck has their school from K to 12. So there are a lot of First Nation schools, and it's actually, I think they have a category too unto themselves in the schooling system. So in those different schools, language is paramount in that different area. Through those schools, often language and the art forms are not only taught, they're developed. And so it gets stronger throughout the actual schooling. You see that in the actual, it's embedded in the actual school because it is a First Nation school. So there are those schools out there also. So field trips would be good to those too.
Any other questions? Okay, I would now like to speak to the issue of stereotyping and labeling of Aboriginal artists. As an educator in a post-secondary institute, I have a number of Aboriginal students who will not self-identify, absolutely refuse to be in the grid. They want to fly under the radar because they do not want to be labeled as Aboriginal artists. They are artists who have Aboriginal ancestry. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to that whole item. I mean, do you consider yourself an Aboriginal artist, or are you an artist who has Aboriginal ancestry? Is there a difference? Does it matter?
Well, I don't put a label to it. I am who I am, and I just move forward. And I enjoy doing what I do, and I try to make. Well, I don't try. I do the best I can. And I just carry myself in a good way, because traditionally, like through my name in Halak, and when I received that name, I have to carry myself in the best way I can, because the ancestors and the people that carried that name before me did the same. So what it becomes a responsibility just to do what I have to do to carry on and move forward and just pass on what I learned. And yeah, I just say I'm Stoll. just a human being and just carry myself in the best way.
Bill, can you speak to no, Cody? You don't want to talk about stereotyping or labeling Aboriginal artists?
I've had the experience of hearing this remark. There comes this idea that's presented to them at times that's expressed as, you know, an Indigenous person representing their community, and in a sadder light, they've expressed this opinion of, you know, not only representing their own community, but say the whole Indigenous population of Canada, and how one way is, you know, they're kind of put that burden or some onto them, and what was really impactful for me to hear is trying to unravel these notions of where does that sort of stem from, or kind of thirst for understanding and sort of placing these whole labels on somebody as representing their whole community, and really there's always a process of how you want to contribute to that community, and it involves, you know, learning and gaining that experience that you can bring back and integrate, and it's a constant kind of process. So I can see why some of the students don't feel that sort of limitations to be not sort of carried forth by themselves. Like bringing your community with you is important, but to have that sort of pushed upon you, it can feel discomforting, and I can kind of relate to see where that idea is being expressed.
So as a sculptress, that's how I really started out. I was multimedia, but when people would be talking about my work, I'd say I do sculpture. And the response back when I first started going to school was, so you carve? I said, no, because I don't work from a whole, I work from parts and put it together. I'm a sculptress. Yeah, but you carve, right? And it kept going back and forth, and finally I'm just like, sure. Fine, whatever. But there are those ideologies, because they see the poles, they see the masks. If we're doing weaving, well, then that's a different, you know, you can weave because that's something different. But when you're doing sculpture or something three-dimensional, for me, I was always running into the fact that then I carve, and it's just people not understanding the scope of our work or the depth of our work. And then I would go into different galleries, and I'd go into all galleries. I'm not limited. I never felt limited to go into the native galleries, as they call them. I went into the Southern Gallery, and this gallery owner looked at me and goes, oh, we don't carry native work. You should go down the road. And I went, So one day that'll come back again, but I think that it's understanding that our art form is meaningful and strong and deep. And if we truly want to be Canadian, you have to understand that component, because that is the land, that is what you're surrounded by and connected to here. And without knowing that history, without knowing that, and if you just keep wanting to label everything, you don't get the deeper understanding. So I think that we have to go beyond this idea of having everything in a nice little package to put it in, and just open up to a greater understanding of what the culture is, so you can find your own Canadian history, because that's Canadian history, is First Nations, and it's a portal through for art form, but it's a portal through to our whole culture. So I am an Aboriginal artist no matter what I'm doing, if I'm doing landscapes, or if I'm doing a big crazy abstract sculpture, or I'm using our own iconography, Northwest Coast iconography, to tell a story with. Whatever I do is Aboriginal, is Native, is Tashot, Gitsan, and Quagyu. So that's my view.
Thank you, Connie. So we're actually nearing the end of our time, and I just wanted to speak a little bit about nomenclature, because you've heard a lot of different terms used today. You've heard the term Indigenous, you've heard the term Native, you've heard the term Aboriginal, First Nations. primarily as a post-secondary educator, our use of language is dictated by the Ministry of Advanced Education for the purposes of accessing funds. But at Emily Carr, we actually had the Aboriginal team, the faculty, myself, and a few students. We developed a course called Indian 101, everything you wanted to know about Indians and were afraid to ask. So I'm putting that out to you now. If you have any questions, we would love to answer them for you. Yes?
If you compare your artwork between Canadian and also the American, what's the difference or similarity?
Good question. Thank you.
The neutronics go on both sides, and the states still recognize us as having no border there. So as a Canadian First Nations, I can go down and be, because that's part of our homeland, is down in that area. Now the finite of it, I would pass it to Bill in terms of the actual visual representation and the differences in it. But our families bridge both sides, and so we don't recognize the border that's been put there. We have to, but we choose. We would rather not.
Thank you. Yes.
You're all wonderful artists in your own way. Do you feel the need to be identified as, what would you prefer to be called?
Did you want to be
Native, Indian, Aboriginal, which term do you feel?
Bobby Joseph Jr. had a good way of saying that when he was talking about coming to meet someone that's, we call it Aboriginal, we're including all of Canada because that's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. But you go to them, there's some of the old school elders that are Indian. That's what they were raised with, that's what they call themselves, so that's the terminology used because that's what they recognize. So he always said, look at who you're talking to and see how they self-identify. For me, it's First Nations. There's no qualms about it. It came through legislation, the idea of First Nations, because of course the English guy got up there and said, oh, we're the first founding father, and the other French guy said, oh, we're the second founding father, and was the Aboriginal stood up and said, yeah, well, we're the First Nation. And I thought, yes, that, for me, I identify with that, and it works for me. So for me, it's always First Nations, but I recognize the diversity in our cultures. I mean, the reality is I'd like everyone to actually know our nations. So you know I'm Tashok from the Nutronic Nation, or if I'm up in Alert Bay, that I'm from Village Island and I'm a Lilliclaw, you know, or I'm Gitsan from Kispioks. So knowing those different names, I'd love it. But I don't even know how, first of all, to pronounce half the names up and down the coast, but you work at it because that's how finite we were. My grandmother used to say that we're all getting lazy because we depend on these little boxes to tell us, which was talking about computers, to tell us, you know, where we are and what we're doing, where before they used to speak, I would swear 10 to 12 different languages fluently because those were the people coming in.
And I would just like to add that the term Aboriginal more or less replaced First Nations because it was felt that it didn't include Inuit and Métis. So that was one of the...
What are Métis considered then?
Métis originally are French and non-Aboriginal French and white origin. Now Métis, I think more or less means mixed blood.
What about the Coast Salish?
The Coast Salish? Do you want to do your definition? It's very much an umbrella. It's an umbrella.
Well, Coast Salish, you know, like you're looking at the bottom of Vancouver Island, you're looking at interior Salish going further up to what we call Pemberton, Montcurry, and Lillooet. There's, yeah. And then the language is what separates us as groups of people. Like I'm Squamish, right? So we have different groups like that. Like and Squamish is also made up of different villages. When they amalgamated together, we became one, what we now call Squamish, right? So Coast Salish is more like the language are just a different dialect.
And it's also a somewhat politically neutral term. So, for example, Emily Carr University resides on, we're on Granville Island. We say it resides on Coast Salish territory because there are 4 different land claims against where Emily Carr is housed. So Musqueam, Stolo, Burrard, and Squamish all have land claims against that land. So we wouldn't want to pick or choose which one we felt. So it's politically neutral for us to identify it as traditional Coast Salish territory. No other questions?
It seems as if you're actually a very complex nation compared with Caucasians, because you have so much tradition that you've brought through with you, and that in itself has brought out this wonderful art from inside. And I think it would be very difficult for children in a school to actually get a grasp on that. I don't have a grasp on it. All I'm looking at is your amazing art. You're a very complex nation.
Thank you. Connie will speak to that.
I think the complexity of our culture is worldwide, really, because we were all Indigenous at one point. It tended to get more amalgamated and more pushed together and more unified because there was a king or someone saying you had to be this way. Yes. We didn't listen as well. We thought, yeah, that's nice, you're a king, but we're good. So we have kept our culture intact. And that complexity of the culture is actually the complexity of human nature and this world. So the way that everything's being packaged and unified is actually detrimental to the world itself, and you can see us wrecking it. Yep. So we have to rebuild that complexity. We have to rebuild those depths of understanding, because then we will take care of the world that we're on. And so because we have only been squashed for hundreds of years rather than thousands and thousands of years, and we're closer to our own Indigenous ties, everyone has those Indigenous ties. And it is finding ways to share that complexity that will heal this world. And I think it's important that those complexities and those finite in humanity start to begin to understand. And I think children are the best way to go because they're the ones that can still get it.
Yes, I agree with you totally. Thank you so much.
Are there any final words from the artists as well that you would like to share?
So there's still things to go with that, and I think when you go into the gallery, take a look at the hat that Isabel Rourke made. So Isabel's a Haida woman who has really brought one element, and that's basketry weaving, into a contemporary sense and also into a market. And so there's other works in history in that hopefully we can bring together, and that's through the YVR Art Scholarship Program, where people can come and work with old pieces and that, become inspired, and open new doors of modern art and old art as well. But reconnect with those pieces, which will hopefully eventually all come to cultural centers at some point in the future.
Any last words?
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here, because thank you for the support, and also, it brings it out more into the public and being able for them to come out and see the work and learn more about what's behind us. We'll see him.
I'll just say thanks for everyone for spending the time to be together today.
I would like to thank the Richmond Art Gallery, Nan and Kathy, and everyone else who is involved with this. Thank you so much for caring and facilitating this event. And certainly the YVR Art Foundation for really just believing in Aboriginal art and artists. Thank you for coming.